So, what do we learn this week about Esper Erayo? And first off, I'm kind of glad I tried to record a league because people ask me all the time, why don't you record in leagues, right? Why don't you record in leagues? And this league was a great example of why I tend to shy away from recording in leagues. So in our league, we played Blue Red Prowess, we played Nyazu, and then we played, in fact, three times in the same league. So with a league, the problem is if I record two player queues and I run into infect three times, I don't feel bad just picking the first one, leaving the other two out, or even just scooping the game sometimes so I can get on to recording another match. However, in a league, it feels so weird to leave out matches because that's kind of the whole point of a league is you see these 5 matches, like your prizes are based on how you do over the course of all the matches. So I'm glad it kind of went this way, just so you could see what happens occasionally when you record in leagues. Hopefully the way this was presented made sense. The matches in the league were a little out of order. It was Infect, Nyazu, Infect, Blue Red Prowess, Infect was the actual order of the league. But if I had posted it in that order, it would have spoiled a lot of stuff, and I wanted to do the Infect videos together because no one's going to watch 3 separate Infect videos. But if you're interested in watching us play Infect a million times, anyway, enough about leagues and recording in leagues. The deck itself is apparently super good at beating Infect, and I guess it's not surprising considering we have essentially 6 free removal spells in the main deck, and even more cheap removal, another Slaughter Pack, Path to Exile in the sideboard, a Twisted Image to deal with spell guides. So our deck is like massively set up to beat Infect for some reason, which is, I guess, kind of just a side effect of trying to flip Erayo. We're playing the Slaughter Packs and the Gut Shots and all that stuff, and it just so happens that those cards wreck Infect. They think, oh, you're tapped out, and they don't expect Gut Shot in the main deck. They don't expect Slaughter Pack in the main deck. So the matchup against Infect seemed really good, backed up by the fact that in our league, we managed to post a winning record. We went 3-2, even though we didn't beat a non-Infect deck. Actually, even including the 2 other matches from the 2-player queues, we didn't beat a non-infect deck the entire time. We came close in some of them, but when it comes right down to it, as far as the deck, I think part of the problem is I didn't feel like the payoff for Erayo was actually that good. Like, yeah, it's cool to counter the opponent's first spell of the turn. I messed with the sideboard a little bit, added in the Eidolon of Rhetorics to have, like, the lock coming out of the sideboard. But even then, it's not that great. Even after we flipped Erayo, it wasn't like we are guaranteed to win. There was a lot of times when we could flip Erayo and our opponent could kind of work around it, or they could Abrupt Decay the Erayo that can't be countered. So it wasn't just like guaranteed to win, and we're putting so much work into that plan that I don't know if it's worth it. And then as far as the rest of the stuff, I don't know. Monastery Mentor is awesome, but it also just dies very quickly. It might be better just as Young Pyromancer. It's a less powerful card, but Young Pyromancer might just be the better option as far as going wide. That's the more commonly played option in Modern. Dark Confidant was surprisingly good, and maybe my biggest problem with the deck was the mana Morphos. The mana was actually very awkward. The lands that we can fetch out with some of our fetches, we couldn't get Manamorphose mana and get, for example, Monastery Mentor mana. So we'd have to make these choices where we'd have both in our hand and they work well together, but we'd have to choose one over the other. So a lot of times we had Manamorphoses rotting in our hand. And while it seems awesome that you can play 2 or 3 or 4 in a row to flip your Erayo or make a bunch of tokens with Mentor, more often than not, they just got stuck in our hand and we had a hard time casting them. So I think, for me, the bottom line is this. If I was going to play this deck again, I would probably drop the Manamorphoses. I would kind of go more towards a straight Esper build without the weird splash for the Manamorphose. If we are going to splash Manamorphose, it's makes more sense to me to splash red instead of green, because then at least we don't have to always pay life for gut shot. As far as Erayo, the most interesting part of this for me was thinking of the blue-red prowess decks that have become popular, the decks that are very good at flipping a thing in the ice on turn 3, pumping up Monastery Mentors. It could be an interesting option to use Erayo in those decks, either in the main deck or coming out of the sideboard. Why it doesn't close out the game in the same way that a thing in the ice will. You can naturally just slot Erayo into the deck, and you can flip them really easily, because that's what that deck is built around doing. So it might be an interesting option for the blue-red prowess decks that could kind of catch people by surprise, really. So I think that would be where I would look if I was going to try to play Erayo. If I was going to stick with the same package, I would go with the red splash over the green splash. I did drop the Gaddock Tees out of the sideboard as well, so we made some changes to the sideboard where green just really isn't that important. So I don't know. My feeling is if you expect to play a lot of Infect, this deck is probably absurd, and our matches back that up. Otherwise, against the field at large, it just didn't seem that great. Modern is so fast, and a lot of decks can win through an Erayo. Yeah, you can counter their Gitaxian Probe, but then they're still going to kill you with the rest of their spells, so it's just not necessarily in that great of a place. A lot of decks can just work around the counter a spell each turn, and even if you do that, some decks can just deal with it with an Abrupt Decay, or they play something first and then kill the Erayo. So we put a lot of work into it, and the payoff just isn't really there compared to making a huge thing in the ice on turn 3 or whatever. So I think maybe Erayo has a place in blue-red prowess. If you play this deck, think of maybe the red splash or dropping the splash altogether and just being strictly Esper instead of the little splash, drop the Manamorphoses. So otherwise, I think the deck is fun. It can win some matches and is good in some matchups, but in general, I wasn't really impressed with Erayo, and I don't know if this has legs to really compete at a tournament level where you got to win 15 rounds against a bunch of different decks. And even though, in fact, a great matchup apparently is the most played or one of the most played decks in Modern, that still puts it at 10%, 9%. So 9 out of 10 matches you play at a GP are not going to be your good matchup. So it's not like Standard where sometimes Blue-White Flash is 30% of the meta, and if you had a great matchup against Blue-White Flash, you're going to get a lot of wins just from that matchup. In Modern, the best decks are not that dominant as far as metagame share, so even being awesome against Infect isn't really enough because the format is just so diverse and so wide and attacks on so many different angles. So anyway, that's been our Much Abrew About Nothing for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.